So I wouldn't say it's a great movie, but I would say it's a perfect movie. And I don't think anyone can deny that the soundtrack popped off at the time, especially the shit from Jay Gordon. I got it burned on a CD if you want to go into the car for a second. Hello. Hello. I understand. There. I guess somebody could have played it. I'm sure somebody remembers it. Too wordy.
Sorry.
That's alright. I can't do it. Can't do it. Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel is an isometric, turn-based and real-time tactical RPG and road trip with the boys simulator. It was developed by Australian studio Microforte and published by 14 Degrees East, the ill-fated strategy wing of Interplay, in 2001. The production of the game makes it sound like a miracle that it exists in any form at all, as it was met with setback after setback amidst a cruelly brief time frame. But for the sake of fleshing out the course of Fallout, I think it might be helpful to refresh what occurred between the production of Fallout 2 and Fallout Tactics. I don't think it would be a stretch to say that Bethesda's Fallout 3, however you feel about it, and for better or worse, brought the franchise out of its niche shadows and turned Fallout into a massively popular and profitable franchise. I mean, even if you loved Fallout 1 and 2 in the late 90s, it's not as though you could go to your local Target and find shirts with the Vault Boy on it, ceramic mugs shaped like Pip-Boys, Vault Tech Christmas sweaters, action figures of Brotherhood of Steel paladins, glowing one Furbies, and Fallout OST hit clips. Most of those things are real, and all of them are embarrassing. It's strange because there already was a passionate fan base for Fallout. It was just smaller, nerdier, smellier. At this launch party for Fallout 2, you can even see a few that have made their own Vault 13 jumpsuits. But this is a fandom for a bygone idea of Fallout. Little did they know they'd have to wait a full decade before receiving another numbered Fallout game, and when it would finally return, it would come home changed. In the meantime, they'd watch the franchise try and fail desperately to escape the quicksand that its publisher left it in. Interplay stood by as the IP flailed about, contorting its body in several directions, while they watched, blank-faced, suggesting impotently, I don't know, why don't you try being an MMO? Once development on Fallout 2 was finished, and while Planescape Torment was still in development, Black Isle had already begun one of two doomed attempts at creating Fallout 3. Knowing that, as fun as it is, they'd have to make the jump to fully 3D eventually, they began tinkering with a new game engine called NDL. Even though Fallout 2 was a commercial success and sold well enough, Interplay, their publisher, was holding up by the grace of sellotape. Lack of financial backing led them to abandon this version of Fallout 3 and instead focus on their counterpoint to Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, another game that was a breakout success and sold well but not well enough to prevent the inevitable. Ironically, the engine they had planned to use, NDL, was bought out and absorbed into Gamebryo, which would then be used to create Bethesda's Fallout 3. So as far back as 98, they were circling their prey. Fallout Tactics is one of two games that exists in the periphery of the franchise, often disliked and passed over, but more commonly, just forgotten entirely. Technically existing as the third Fallout game, but even in its genesis, it was never meant to be a mainline sequel. It was released amidst a turbulent turbulent time for its creators and emerged as the sole survivor of several failed attempts at ensuring Fallout's future. Rewinding back to 1999, the CEO of fledgling studio Microforte would approach Interplay with a pitch for an isometric shooter called Chimera. Prior to this, they worked on a strategic action game called Enemy Infestation, which is clearly the stepping stone towards the gameplay style of Tactics, and is a charming, if simplistic, little game in its own right, and features Australians doing their best to sound, I think, American.
Following the meteorite hit, we seem to have not heard from 2 Marines on base duty.
Interplay was not interested in their idea for the game, but were impressed by the quality of the demo they produced for it, leading to the head of 14 Degrees East suggesting that they use their Phoenix engine to create a tactical game set in the Fallout universe. The CEO of Interplay, Brian Fargo, signed off on the game, insisting that it have a multiplayer component that would be ready to show off by E3 2000, and be out in time for Christmas of that year. Unfortunately, much of the initial planning for the game was a bit muddled and marred by indecision. When Microforte and Interplay had their first design meeting, they were pretty certain the game would only feature turn-based combat, and only be real-time outside of combat encounters. But by the time E3 rolled around, the turn-based combat was not ready to show off, so they instead showed off what they later admitted to be faked real-time combat. This would be the only deadline they'd meet, with each successive one being thrown off by Microforte's admittedly poor planning. The first real demo they produced turned out to be a bit of a disaster and put the game's future in jeopardy. It was around here that internal frustrations about what this game was supposed to be hit in apex, and Microforte's CEO stepped in to more clearly define what the game's focus would be, and that would be creating interesting and dynamic tactical battles. And the planned RPG elements would be simplified and no longer a large focus of production, aiming for some kind of fusion between XCOM and Jagged Alliance, with the soul of Fallout beneath it. Microforte had clearly devised production so that much of it could be created as it was being conceptualized. Because they first nailed down the suite of tools to create levels and tiles, it was easy for their artists to draw up assets for the game and drop them into levels themselves. The drawback to this was they had already created so much under the assumption that it would be a turn-based RPG acting as merely a refined version of Fallout 1 and 2's gameplay. Around Christmas of the year 2000 and the game's original release window, they began to realize that everything they had been planning was sort of nebulous and dreamt up on the fly. The last 4 months of development saw them drastically redesigning the mission structure to fit the new focus on tactics. Another early problem that threw off the course of development was the game's art assets. Microforte had confidently agreed that they could have Fallout Tactics Gold in 12 months, under the assumption that they would mostly be working with the art assets from Fallout 1 and 2, since the game would be aesthetically identical. So why not just repurpose all the character models and bits and pieces that they had already made and create something new with them alongside their own additions? Later, Interplay would inform them that they no longer had access to the raw data for the previous Fallout games, so they would have to create the game's assets from scratch. I don't know how complicated things were at Interplay. From my completely detached, ignorant consumer perspective, it sounds like it was run kind of like Wolfram and Hart mixed with The Office, but I can't imagine how that shit happened. Like, someone just deleted the Fallout folder to make room for System of a Down Legend of Zelda Live.mp3. Following this revelation, Microforte attempted to bargain for more time to address this huge setback, but were only given more money, which they used to hire several more artists to essentially remake every piece of Fallout 1 and 2, forging their art style as to be almost indistinguishable from the originals. They got it done, but this created something of a grim atmosphere, as most of the artists knew they wouldn't be employed after the game launched. Microforte at large anticipated this as well, knowing that they might make the new release window, but after all the money they pumped into Fallout Tactics, their future was uncertain. Yet more issues arose because of the negative feedback concerning this project from the Fallout message boards and forums. Fans did not take to this new direction Microforte wanted to take Fallout, specifically its plans to make the game completely linear and mission-based. Seeing this as a big enough issue, they set about retrofitting a world map that linked the missions together, one that, much like the original Fallout, was full of random encounters, some just enemies to fight and others fun distractions or pop culture references. This last-minute decision to cave to fan demands is pretty emblematic of this entire game's journey. We started as a bunch of plucky Australians wanting to make a shooter But instead, they got handed the keys to a massively successful franchise with a Bible's worth of lore, and wound up a bunch of tired and broke Australians in a gamer sweatshop making a Fallout spin-off that was both being hate-bombed online and shoved out the door, and also knowing you wouldn't have a job afterwards. Maybe, fucking hopefully they got like a pizza party afterwards at least. Then bye-bye. Good luck in the sausage sizzle, you don't count. They'd later express regret that they didn't look at the original Fallout more critically, because Fallout Tactics repeats many of the same mistakes that Fallout made, keeping in things that realistically should have been updated, changed, or omitted, included essentially to maintain the idea of what many thought Fallout was supposed to be according to its fickle fanbase. As it got closer to release, the team was nearing crunch conditions to finish substantial portions of it. They also had trouble with QA testing as the game was so large and had so many variables it required several playthroughs in both turn-based and real-time to find issues. Even though they had addressed all the glaring, game-breaking issues that cropped up, there were many smaller problems that they didn't notice until the game was already on store shelves. Producer Chris Taylor would later paint this period as the devs desperately trying to get a few more months to playtest, but Interplay essentially stonewalled them and insisted that the game be released as soon as possible. The revision process before the game was sent in to be mastered by Interplay apparently only lasted 4 days, whereas other RPGs would have weeks to months spent making sure there were no issues warranting a delay. On release, Fallout Tactics was reviewed well, with Computer Gaming World writing, "There's not a hardcore gamer alive who wouldn't enjoy this game. The engrossing atmosphere and length of gameplay mixed with replayability and multiplayer features puts Fallout Tactics right in the thick of Strategy Game of the Year contenders, an award it incidentally lost to an RTS game called Kohan, Immortal Sovereigns."
Thank you so much, my lord. We were certain that if help did not arrive, the brigands would overrun our village and destroy any chance of us surviving. Your assistance is a gift from the Creator. Verena is at your service. Anything you request of us will be granted. Press OK to continue.
This June issue is kind of a neat time capsule of this period, amongst coverage and ads for many other Interplay products. It also features a 2-page preview of Black Isle's Torn, a game that was in development for well over a year, with many of the team behind Planescape Torment at the helm. Noteworthy because it was to be an original IP created whole cloth by Black Isle. It would be their first fully 3D game and would incorporate a modified version of Fallout's special rule set. It made it far enough to feature a playable demo at E3 2001, but was quietly cancelled shortly after. 4 years later, Virgus Urquhart and Chris Avalon would be interviewed about the game's cancellation, and while they do finger Interplay as one of the culprits, knowing they wouldn't meet the deadline set by them, they also cite low morale and increasing internal conflict within Black Isle that led to several layoffs as responsible for Torn's demise. Also, easy to miss, but I like that even though Tactics gets not only a 2-page review and a guide from the creators in the back, they still manage to sneak in a little tea in the good, bad, and the ugly segment. The magazine makes mention of recent studio layoffs, writing, "Interplay and Sierra laid off many of the developers of Fallout Tactics and Tribes 2. After those games shipped, some reward for finishing your game. A pink slip." Fuck. These guys killed Interplay. They're dead now. There was little in the way of fiercely critical reviews, but many that strongly imply that it doesn't meet the standard created by the other Fallout games. With Game Zone adding rather dramatically, it is a game that would not be put into one of its own vaults. It would be allowed to remain in the outside world and be nuked until its memory was nothing more than Fallout. And now, if you'll excuse me, I got a math class to fail. Shortly before the release of Fallout Tactics, work had begun on Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel 2, not to be confused with Fallout Brotherhood of Steel 2, which was funnily enough also cancelled and used cannibalized bits of this cancelled game's plot. The primary objective would have been to stop a malfunctioning Gek, the terraforming MacGuffin from Fallout 2. At some point, one of these had become irradiated and began pumping out mutated wildlife and vegetation at an alarming rate, presumably when it became clear that the first game would not adequately alleviate Interplay's financial woes. This sequel was cancelled, joining Fallout Online and Chris Avalon up there in canceled heaven. So what led me to want to create content concerning this game was that, despite knowing all of the problems that began honestly from the second Microforte walked into Interplay, this game's kind of important to me because it was my entry point into Fallout, a franchise that oh boy. I was gonna say love, but even the fact that I hesitated displays my complicated feelings about it. I love the Fallout universe, the themes, ideas, and design it encompasses. I think at some point, the series kind of forgot what its core principles were, and now it's a totally different thing that walks around wearing Fallout's desiccated corpse, but still manages to be enjoyable in its own right. Just don't get too close to it, it'll bite you. I think I have across the board, like, the wrong take on every front when it comes to Fallout. I really like some of them, including some that many don't even like to acknowledge, and I'm not crazy about others that some seem to like a whole heck of a lot. In any case, this weird, divisive death knell to classic Fallout was my introduction to the Fallout world, and it left an enduring impression on me that for a long time made me perhaps needlessly defensive of it, when even its creators acknowledge it was rushed, mismanaged, and riddled with unresolved issues. This was probably also exacerbated when I, having enjoyed the game a great deal, sought out more information about the franchise, only to find that many had mostly angry or dismissive things to say about it, that it's not Fallout, or even if they say it's good, they say it's good, but it's not Fallout, that it takes too many liberties and contradicts the canon. It leaves me in this awkward middle ground of the fandom where I can both maintain a chip on my shoulder about the franchise's treatment once it jumped to 3D, yet also find the pedantry about its lore and mechanics from fans of the original insufferable. Precisely the kind of mewling that contributed to Fallout Tactics being the mess it is, even though much of its failings can be pinned on that most toxic relationship between developer and publisher. Its response still provides an early example of how gamers ruined gaming. Without recapping the entirety of what Fallout is in depth, because you probably have the basics already, in brief, the Fallout games take place in the distant future, though not our future, in a timeline that mirrors our own in many ways, but deviates heavily starting with the end of World War II. We took a series of different steps that led us to focus on different pursuits and ideologies, and importantly, different scientific and technological achievements, putting advanced nuclear-powered devices like laser guns and robotic butlers in everyone's home. Despite these retro-futuristic amenities, the US seemed to stagnate, stuck in this bizarre, anachronistic, and idealized version of the 1950s well into the 2070s. They kinda made America great again, and then it was like, well, now what? I guess we fucking blow each other up. During a prolonged Cold War standoff with the USSR, the US became increasingly paranoid about communism, and to combat this, kicked over every scientific rock they could in order to develop some wacky sci-fi means of securing a glorious future for capitalism, which, to no one's surprise, ended with the surface of the Earth becoming an irradiated wasteland. This is the backdrop Fallout uses to poke fun and sometimes meaningfully gaze into the country's history, morality, and love affair with war, particularly how it never changes. Fallout Tactics is set around 30 years after Fallout 1. In the American Midwest, specifically what used to be Illinois, and instead of a single figure traveling the wastes, it follows a rogue sect of the Brotherhood of Steel. This game undoubtedly goofs some details concerning the origins of the Brotherhood of Steel, as well as a few other bits of minutia, which as that stands, I think is fixable. We can double back and duct tape over a few things with one of a million excuses, but Bethesda did not want to go through that trouble when they were creating Fallout 3, and had their own revisions that were important to their vision for the franchise's future. And a couple significant things happened within Fallout Tactics that didn't square with that plan, where it would be weird if the characters in Fallout 3 didn't say, hey, remember when that happened? So they don't, and it is still weird to me because Fallout Tactics feels so much like a classic Fallout game that might as well be accepted. Let me rephrase, it's not exactly like Fallout, it's just very similar in aesthetic and atmosphere, and, well, I think you could confuse a screenshot of Fallout Tactics for a screenshot of Fallout 2, I think, if it was very dark and you had just been concussed, and maybe the same couldn't be said about Fallout 2 and 3. So, in the pocket dimension this game has been banished to, the Brotherhood of Steel began as a division of the military that was unexpectedly sheltered sheltered in a vault with a bunch of scientists when the bombs of the Great War were falling. They weren't yet called the Brotherhood, but they collectively began to unravel that the scientists were developing and experimenting with the FEB virus, which created the super mutant menace we face in Fallout 1. Disgusted by these inhumane experiments, they broke their ties to the military and killed all the scientists. Armed with a stockpile of pre-war technology, they then set out to rebuild society in the irradiated landscape, piecing together their own strange techno-religious beliefs and quickly becoming a powerful force. The, I guess, unforgivable deviation here is that in the previous games they make it clear that the military group that would become the Brotherhood, as well as their families, were never put in a vault, but were specifically the soldiers stationed at the Mariposa military base. Oh, wow! Big mistake. How will we ever recover? In both interpretations, they slowly became more fixated on the preservation and cataloging of technology, seeing it as the thing that will lead to our salvation, isolating themselves more and more, playing the long game to remake the world instead of fighting little battles for little victories. You know, saving some dirt farmer's sickly, disease-ridden Brahmin in exchange for a handful of caps and a lizard on a stick. They gotta make big moves. Save a guy with more caps. Maybe a bigger lizard on a stick. The Brotherhood we see in Tactics is, however, not the main chapter of the Brotherhood. This splinter faction came about over a disagreement with how the Brotherhood should recruit and carry on their teachings. The old sect refused to break tradition, insisting that the bloodline of the Brotherhood remain pure, that they need not add the unwashed indigenous wastelanders to their ranks, and should just... I don't know what they're gonna do. Download more, baby. They put the idea to a vote, and the majority decided that they should keep the Brotherhood as an exclusive organization. The minority was perhaps in an act of punishment sent on a suicide mission to clean up the mess left in the wake of Fallout 1. The scattered super mutant forces had begun organizing once again, so this banished group was put in an experimental aircraft and shipped off to assess the threat and stop it. Unfortunately, dirigibles proved to be just as impractical in this fantasy world, and the ships are scattered and destroyed by a violent storm. The small group that survives crash lands in the outskirts of what used to be Chicago, cut off from the main Brotherhood chapter and left to fend for themselves. Without their influence, this new woke sect would regain their ranks by allowing tribals and mutants and ghouls to join their ranks, quickly amassing an imposing roster. An adjustment you're gonna have to make to enjoy this game's plot is to accept that it is not the same format or caliber of storytelling and world building seen in Fallouts 1 and 2. It's a bit more linear, there aren't any dialogue options, and your character isn't really an important figure beyond leading a group of Brotherhood paladins that does significant things. So moment to moment, your character may as well not exist. The only way they really differ from your other characters is that if they die, then you get a game over. I guess I'm trying to sell this game like I would sell myself in a date scenario, as in just undersell, so that when you surpass even the lowest expectations, you're in, baby. Please keep the lights off. I don't want you to see me. No! Don't look at me! At the start of the game, you play as a fresh Brotherhood initiate, sent on their first mission under the command of General Barnaky, the leader of this chapter. He wants the Brotherhood to claim more territory around Chicago and build relations with the tribals that live there. But raiders have amassed in large numbers and regularly terrorize them, so you set out to protect the tribal leader and take out some of the raiders, working your way up the ranks so that they'll disperse and no longer have a foothold on this area. This seems like pretty stock Fallout business so far, but this is the first in a series of little, barely connected arcs that show your power and influence in Chicago growing. After removing the threat of the raiders, you've earned the trust of the tribals and have therefore opened up trading with them, and they send a few of their strongest to join the cause. This is also how your character is officially inducted into the Brotherhood. There is a main plot gently beating underneath your missions, but for a while it mostly seems like disconnected vignettes. Another battle in the endless fight for the wasteland. The goal of this faction concerns another idea that is a bit incongruous with the greater Fallout lore, and that is Vault Zero, which they lay out pretty immediately as where this story is headed in the opening cutscene. This now non-canonical vault was meant to be the central hub connecting all the vaults in the country via a mysterious and experimental computer system that was not completed before the surface was reduced to rubble. This is Microforte's explanation as to why all the vaults featured so far have just been isolated nightmare bunkers with no contact between each other. Without a completed Vault Zero, all the vaults were cut off from each other and left to fend for themselves. Obviously a potential Library of Alexandria for a group that hoards scientific and technological secrets. As you complete missions, you'll pick up vague rumblings, documents, NPC dialogue concerning things to come, but for now, the Brotherhood will ship you and your squad out to stamp out various fires in the Midwest, like the Beast Lords, a group of weirdos that the Brotherhood thinks are telepathically controlling mutated animals, including Deathclaws, to attack their enemies. The Brotherhood sends you to defeat this enemy, but are clearly more intrigued by how they're managing to pull this off, and the idea of controlling a horde of Deathclaw seems pretty spicy, showing that not even the Brotherhood can resist a ludicrous sci-fi scheme that would grant them some fleeting measure of power. Hunting down their leaders reveals that the Beast Lords have developed the ability to speak with animals by living in a cave full of toxic slime for 20 years. Man, I've lived in toxic sludge for over 20 years, and all I got is mental illness, and the ability to commune with machine. Isn't that right? No, I think he's updating or something. He's probably doing this just to embarrass me. But this seems to only work on lesser creatures. Deathclaw proved to be too intelligent to be controlled by them, so they resorted to kidnapping and caging a talking Deathclaw matriarch, and are just blackmailing it to get its young to do what they want. Which, again, the fact that it's a talking Deathclaw might not entirely make sense because those don't show up until Fallout 2, when the Enclave experimented on them, but that's okay. That's fine. Like, literally just make something up. Fucking, I don't know, one got loose while they were doing early tests, or it listened to Symphony No. 9 and was like, oh fuck, I can feel things? Grug? If you'd like to experience this game on your own without having the entire thing spoiled for you, feel free to skip to this time and only hear my thoughts on the story in a generalized sense. I trust you'll make the right decision and play Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel to completion, and then return to this video. That really does sound like the most likely scenario to me. You'll do that, won't you? So has there been any, like, ghosts or anything around lately? That is what I feel like you did detect, but I feel like you've been kind of quiet lately.
Scanning.
I wasn't saying initiate a scan.
Canceling scan.
Just trying to have a conversation, I guess.
Submit query.
I don't know. What kind of music do you like?
Uploading Spotify playlist.
Alright, let's go. Pull it up. I'm handing you the ox, so to speak. Okay. So we're opening with the sound of an antique tractor.
Yes.
Okay. Strong start.
Agreed.
Eventually, the Brotherhood finally faces the enemy it was sent to the Midwest to deal with in the first place. The remnants of the super mutant threat still prove to be a formidable enemy, and the Brotherhood loses a lot of its ranks. You're sent to the St. Louis area as backup to help out a division called Talon Squad, as well as General Barnaky on the front line. But when you arrive, Talon is essentially wiped out, and Barnaky is taken prisoner by the second in command of this loose-knit super mutant army. Seeing as this dummy is the closest thing to a recurring character so far, you kind of feel his loss. While the super mutants remain an enemy for the duration of the game, you can gain some of them as followers. This is the result of a mission to destroy what the Brotherhood assumed to be a munitions factory, but is revealed to be a laboratory where the super mutants are working to find a method of curing their sterility. After the Master was destroyed in Fallout 1, not all of them banded together to remain an army. Some of them just wanted to live something approximating as normal a life as you could have in the wasteland. Nothing is learned about the whereabouts of General Barnaky, though. In the next mission, the Brotherhood once again acts out of their own self-interest under the guise of compassion, and helps protect a cult of ghouls that worship nuclear power from repeated attacks by super mutants. This cult has in their possession an unused nuclear warhead as a religious idol, which could prove useful for the Brotherhood, and will also get this group of ghouls to join their fight by offering to protect it. And hey, I'm not gonna say it, but I will say it. Could be one of many reasons why Bethesda wanted this game forgotten, because they were like, fuck, that's kind of a cool idea. But I'm not going to say that. I refused.
For this ancient weapon of war is our salvation.
This is one of the more straightforward missions that acts almost like a tower defense level, where you just get attacked by waves of enemies, and then at the end you dust your hands off and get back on the road. But dialogue within the game files seemed to suggest that this cult was originally supposed to be led by a ghoul named Harold, who shows up in both Fallout 1 and 2, which would have been both a cute callback to the other games and would have made this whole segment a lot more interesting. You'd even get a glimpse into their weird prophecies and beliefs, but all that remains in-game is that sometimes other acolytes will say, "Any see Harold lately?" Which might just be a way to memorialize a dead plotline, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was something they just forgot to delete, because it contains either a typo or just bizarre syntax. Like all the other guys talk rather eloquently about, dumping chemicals in their pants. Along the way, the super mutant attacks have been relentless, so much so that Barnaky's replacement, Decker, begins to suspect that they are being fed information about their tactics. This turns out to be right on the money. They are able to track down where the super mutant leader dwells, and the squad arrives to find him on the brink of death. In his confused ramblings, he mentions that they lost Barnaky. They had meant to bring him back to their base, but were met by a force much stronger than them, and he was taken. In his half-dead state, he mistook you for their leader, Gamoran, which turns out to be not only a human, but a former Brotherhood paladin, who, mid-battle, attempts to get you to see reason, to understand his motives, despite them being kinda unclear, begging you to see the severity of the undead enemy. And it really did give me pause. It made me wonder, whose side was I on, really? And are we so different from our...
You've completed the objectives.
This is actually, unfortunately, the most interesting plot idea this game has, and it's completely broken. There's enough scraps left in the game files for you to see what they were going for, but as it stands, this just seems to be a crazy ex-paladin that wound up leading the super mutants for reasons we will never fully understand. So what I'm assuming was supposed to happen was you kill this guy and probably feel conflicted about it. Sounded as though he was about to explain himself before we gunned him down. We'd then find a hollow disk journal belonging to him, which is still in the game. It's right. It's right here. I guess wherever place in between reality that highlights here that's where it is. You can pick it up and look at it, but you can't listen to it. This does seem to trigger new dialogue when you finish the mission. Decker tells you that you found the journal of Paladin Latham, the former identity of Gamoran. He was on one of the airships that the rest of the Brotherhood had assumed was lost completely. And that's it. He's dead. We're gonna have a funeral for him in the garage later. In the game files, though, you can find the unimplemented holodisk dialogue that would have played after you defeated him. And it's not only a great performance, it completely fucks with the morality of this mission and most of the Brotherhood's actions throughout the game. It also makes Latham/Gamoran a far more compelling villain. After his airship crashed, his squad was taken prisoner by super mutants. Not wanting to die a slave to his enemy, he challenged their leader, also named Gamoran, to a duel, hand-to-hand combat to the death. A fight that, even to his surprise, ended with him as the victor. With Gamoran dead, the other super mutants respected him enough to just follow his lead from there on out. He was quite literally just made the new Gamoran. Unfortunately, the Herculean task of defeating a super mutant with his bare hands also left him with severe brain damage that slowly began to affect his judgment and grip on reality, having fits of anger and hallucinations.
This morning, I thought I was attacked by a death claw. Too far from my SMG, I lashed out with my ripper, slashing the beast's throat. My vision cleared in time to see Nathan the scribe's eyes go cloudy, his neck in ruin, his blood covering my hands.
In a really intriguing choice, part of this journal is also devoted to his observations of the super mutants. He describes them as intelligent and far more capable of kindness and compassion than he was taught by the Brotherhood.
While considered stupid by many, they show a loyalty stronger than I've seen in many humans. They live life the only way they know how.
These dudes we've been killing the whole time are actually kinda chill when you humanize them for a goddamn second. As Latham's condition worsened, he was eventually confronted by a squad of Brotherhood paladins, though ones that no longer resembled the Brotherhood he knew. These fellas, flying his former colors, start gunning down super mutants, and he finally snaps, seeing the Brotherhood as inhuman for their treatment of his new green buddies.
I finally know who I am. I am Gamoran, sworn enemy of the menace from the west.
After this initial fight, he became aware of a new threat that even the super mutants had no chance of surviving. So it's likely in his final moments there, he was trying to explain that they needed to work together, but the Brotherhood wasn't really interested in hearing him out. If you ain't human, I had enough of human. If you're green, you've got time to clean. This really does seem like, the sort of thesis statement of the entire game, really. The end game for its almost there theme of systemic racism, and it's just not in its place. Because the Brotherhood of Steel, at least this flavor of them, are cops, right? They provide this veneer of protection, safety, but really they just serve the interest of capital, money, tech, power. The whole business is rotten at its foundations. They are trained to be a hateful, insular little cult. Nobody trusts them or likes them all that much either. For no real reason, you can interact with this guy who tells you about his sister falling in love with a reformed raider. She did the impossible. She fixed a smelly boy. But the Brotherhood threw both of them in a labor camp where she was mistreated, abused, and worked to death, all for consorting with raider scum.
Look, this place is bad enough with these robots. Last thing we need is you Brotherhood bullies moving in. Why don't you take your big brother tyranny somewhere else?
You can say, hey, I'm gonna be one of the good ones. I'm gonna save the super mutant pacifists. And then Decker informs you that they've confiscated their research as a bargaining chip. You can save the ghouls, but then they steal their sacred nuke. You can save the Deathclaw, but then I don't know what you do with those. I think that genuinely might have been my bad. You just can't win. Abolish the Brotherhood? Defund the Brotherhood? People are saying this. I don't know. Either way, Avocet. Holodiscs as a means of doling out plot were in general supposed to be a feature in the game, and more of them were recorded and are just sitting there on the disc with no way to listen to them in game. So I mean, technically this game has a very interesting plot on the disc. It's shipped with that content. You just have to really give a shit to experience it. It's not long before the real threat to the Brotherhood reveals itself, and I'd say from here forward, the plot does take a turn into a big idea that is interesting for sure, but feels pretty removed from what I appreciate about Fallout. The big bad at the center of the story is an army of robots. Yes, just saying that fills me with a feeling I can only categorize as defeat. Because it's a little too big, it's too broad sci-fi. They do their darndest to make it interesting and have it feel homogenous with the rest of it, but it's hard to deny that from here on out, it becomes the robot game. Certainly hope they don't revisit humanoid robots anytime in the future. That would be silly. That would be kind of f***ing dumb, wouldn't it? The biggest issue with this robot army is that nobody is really good at killing them. Bullets and explosives hardly make a dent in their metal bodies, so they turn to another Micro Forte OC group, a technology-obsessed religious sect called the Reavers, for help. Well, not at first. At first, they're just another group of jerks raiding towns for supplies and tech parts. But eventually, their forces are split, fighting the robots and the Brotherhood. Determining the robots to be a greater threat, they send a Reaver delegate to a Brotherhood base to create a temporary alliance against the robots, offering in exchange the knowledge of how to build EMP weapons that are highly effective against the robots, allowing the Brotherhood of Steel to take out structures they've built to repair themselves and manufacture weaponry. As we move closer and closer to Vault Zero, setting up Brotherhood outposts along the way, it becomes evident that the robots seem to be coming from the vault, appearing in greater numbers the closer they get to it. Eventually, we uncover how this came to be through recordings of Vault Tech scientists. The mysterious computer system that was meant to oversee all the vaults was a revolutionary and highly unethical device called the Calculator, essentially a supercomputer that uses human brains stored in cryotubes as hard drives, containing, quite literally, the brightest minds of their time. Unfinished and without further administration, it sets about the task of restoring order and safety on the surface in the cold, clinical way that made sense to it. This included killing most of the vault dwellers within and leaving the remaining who attempted to reel it back under control with brain damage. The saving grace of this idea for me is the particulars of why this failed so miserably, which is so patently Fallout that it redeems it. This lofty goal of a biomechanical vault overlord failed not because of some malevolent glitch in its programming or the machinations of a mad scientist. It was budget cuts. The management at Vault-Tec decided that the likelihood of a complete nuclear annihilation was looking, unlikely. We're better than that. We, as humans, you know, we fight and we fight, but I think deep down everybody knows. And cut the budget for the calculator project by tens of billions of dollars, instead funneling that money into more practical upgrades to Vault Zero, like smoking rooms and piano bars, as well as a hunting ground where you could hunt rare endangered animals. For a while it seems like the Brotherhood is coming out on top of this fight with the robots. That is until they switch tactics and kidnap a traveling merchant that has followed your journey towards Vault Zero since the beginning. This is concerning because that means this merchant has detailed knowledge about where all of the Brotherhood bases are, and how much of a threat each one poses. So the squad is sent, realistically, to kill him before he can reveal anything compromising to them. Luckily, we find him still alive, but barely. Though he has been tortured and dismembered by the robots, he never talked, and only asked that you let the Paladins know that, and put him out of his misery. It's a little sad, but it also sounds like a successful mission. Let's go!
Yeah. We did it. God damn it, they got my boy, Barnaky. I'm gonna commit a hate crime against ghouls in your honor, buddy. You would have liked that. He was such an asshole.
Thinking it's time to make one all-or-nothing assault on the calculator before we give the robots enough time to regroup, the Brotherhood formulates a plan. While the rest of their forces stay and protect their nearest bunker, the player's squad will transport the nuclear warhead they collected earlier and promised to protect to the front door of Vault Zero and detonate it, seeing this as their best shot at penetrating a vault door designed to withstand exactly such a scenario. Thankfully, this works, and the squad is able to enter and make their way to the calculator's domain. But before that, they are confronted by what has become of General Barnaky. His brain has been made to power a large robot body that is programmed to protect the calculator at all costs. You could engage in a fight with him and defeat him, but if by chance you took his locket off his lobotomized corpse and held onto it until this confrontation, he'll seem to come to his senses. The memory of his wife overpowering the robotic manipulation done to his thoughts. He instead just walks you over to the calculator and in a confused stupor says, like, I guess do whatever you gotta do. I don't really know what's what anymore. He just kind of stands in the corner muttering to himself about Maria. For a game with a pretty minimal plot, at least compared to its predecessors, there are surprisingly 4 endings, with the option that seemed to make the most sense being one of the worst ones. Robo Barnaky is a bit of an emotional wreck because of what he's become, but he does have enough lucidity to suggest that instead of blowing up the calculator, he could just put his brain into it and thus control all the robots, making them a tool for the Brotherhood. Doing this stops their assault on the Brotherhood and elsewhere across the wasteland, and at first seems pretty ideal. The Brotherhood is pretty much unstoppable, and the robots are used to protect settlements and bases, but the part that he didn't really share with us was his plan to enact genocide on all people affected by mutation. So for any mutants or ghouls, it's on site pretty much. I guess it's not too surprising since Barnaky said a lot of cool shit concerning these marginalized groups.
While most of our elders believe ghouls are almost our equals, I do not agree.
Yeah, well, guess what? Now you're like 95% robot, okay? So I don't see you as an equal. I'm sorry. I was just saying. Don't look at me like that. Don't look at me that same way you always look at me. But much of the story feels like this mission of unity, bringing all these people together for a common goal, even if that was often sort of just a byproduct. So it feels extra fucked up that this is what he chose to do with his newfound power. Offering your own brain to the calculator is of course an option, and the result is determined by your karma rating. If you killed many innocent characters throughout your playthrough, mutants and other new races will not be targeted. Instead, you will wind up
assassinating the Brotherhood's leaders and use your robot hive mind to whatever end your character sees fit, good or bad. Presumably bad, since you killed all those innocent people to get there. If you had somehow resisted the urge to kill innocents, this is the closest thing to a good ending. Neither the Brotherhood nor the Wasteland's marginalized people are threatened, and some manner of temporary peace is administered by a combination of the Brotherhood and their new robot buddies. The only uncertainty comes from the fact that it's a lot of trust to put into one dude's brain. This is hard to pull off though, because in order to get to the prompt to insert your own brain, you have to kill all the brains attached to the calculator, which are all technically innocent people, so each one you destroy is a substantial dose of negative karma. There's a lawyer brain, a politician brain, a porn star brain, and even a game developer brain that shares some fourth wall breaking goofs about the game's design. So hopefully, with this gamer brain's demise, mankind will be instructed how to shower and not be toxic. You could also let the calculator self-destruct, ending the threat, but also making seemingly the most significant power in the Wasteland useless, and also making Vault Zero useless, other than being a cool place to store your Nuka-Cola. My biggest issue with Fallout Tactics concerning its story is that it seems really disjointed for a while, and like it doesn't want to have a clear plot structure, and then it wants that really fast towards the end. But it's absolutely enjoyable if you already like other Fallout games. It hits some emotional notes that are uncharacteristically melodramatic and emotional for the earlier games. We get some amusing what-if scenarios concerning elements we're familiar with. There's a completely inconsequential side mission where a gang of civilians band together to steal the power armor from a group of Brotherhood paladins and kill them. They then use it to terrorize their small community and assume control entirely because they are more or less invincible in it. The fact that so much chaos could ensue just by a couple dudes stealing a robot suit is a really great premise. There's also plenty of wholly new ideas that are only really seen in this game that are fun as a one-time inclusion. And I'm not really broken up that they don't make a return elsewhere. There are several bits of Fallout that show up in later games that have me thinking like, okay, I guess we can just do this again, sure. But a lot of this game seems to live in a little forgotten bubble that is kind of nice. Inside this tactics bubble, there's also a lot of grittier, slimier dialogue that honestly can be a little rough. A few times I could be heard muttering such phrases as, the grounded and whimsical dichotomy that the franchise often plays with is pushed into further extremes, and look, there are some subjects that other Fallout games tackle a little more subtly, like racism, slavery, and sexual violence that this game is certainly a little less chill about, let's say. It takes these things and kind of tactlessly says, yeah, that's what's been going on this whole time, right? Thought that was obvious. It's also, I think, the game that makes the Brotherhood of Steel out to be the most deranged and morally suspect. Anytime you're congratulated for some heroic action that benefits the Brotherhood, it's subverted in a really dismissive way right at the end with some comment that makes them out to be just as cruel as any other faction in the Wasteland.
Well done. The scoundrels' bodies will be displayed in proper crucifixion outside the town of Quincy, along with the guards that were on watch. Our inquisitors have also rounded up known friends and family of the criminals to an internment camp.
Oh, great. That's great. It's good to have a support system.
You may proceed to the extraction point. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Murderer.
What?
They really do come off as assholes for most of this game, viewing the people they're meant to be saving as resources, training kids to use laser guns, ritually punishing and exiling them if they break said laser guns, going up to traders and asking if they sell Ligma. More than one character will describe them as being no better than raiders.
We both take what we want from these savages. If you think your cause is any more selfless than ours, you're sadly mistaken.
It is unquestionably a story that would have been more memorable if it was finished. People have scoured through the game files and sure found remnants of abandoned story threads, but more tragically, just context, exposition that would have made you feel empathy for some characters, explained their motives, and it's just lost, so all you're left with are these hollow cartoon versions of them. It's like someone gave up assembling a piece of IKEA furniture because company was already knocking at the door, and they were just like, fuck it! I got my jungle skog, I got my cheese and crackers, and I got my second Jungle Scott.
Now, during each break, I'll name my MVD, most valuable Digimon. And the first one goes to Agumon.
I take a bitter comfort in the fact that I do think Microforte had some creative ideas for Fallout. And had they nailed that down a little earlier and had Interplay been more accommodating and not locked into a corporate fight or flight stance, those ideas would have hugely changed the tone and effectiveness of this story. The Fallout tactics that we got exists with the skeleton of an interesting story, but lacking much of the flesh that would elevate it beyond an uncanny ghoul. Clearly, both by design and due to unforeseen events, it never approaches the world building or character moments that Fallout and Fallout 2 were known for. But I also get the impression that they probably had a more manageable concept for the game and were mostly pressured into greater ambitions, creating too many plates to spin for such a small dev team. You have this facsimile of a winding story full of difficult subject matter and moral quandary, but really, it's still just what it says on the box. It's a Fallout-themed tactics game. In the end, I think what is there is perfectly enjoyable despite being less intellectually stimulating. There's plenty of other ways it can stimulate you, though. It's read articles online, it's trying for you. It's not another dose of Fallout, but it's pretty similar. And for this interpretation of Fallout, I think it sticks the landing. It ends perfectly on brand for what came before it, which is something I feel like most of the Fallouts from 3 forward have trouble with. There have been at least 2 Fallouts from Bethesda that I actually laughed a lot at the ending, because I'm really sorry, but I found it to be very bad. I mean, the ending to Fallout Tactics wasn't great, but most of it wasn't great, so all I can do is pat it on the back and say, good job, buddy. Let's put this on the fridge. You made it through the nightmare of you existing at all. For sure, any affection I have for this game is colored by it being my first Fallout, and what I think I'm trying to, in a roundabout way, say is nostalgia for the first incarnation of this franchise. I liked when the games were isometric and turn-based. I think that was a really fun format, and it's a shame it went out the way it did. Like a dog in the street. So I'm not gonna say I don't like the first-person Fallout games. I'm gonna say I despise them. Nah, but really, there's a lot I enjoyed about all of them, and when the next one comes out, you bet your ass I'm gonna play it and enjoy it less and less as it goes on until I'm left disillusioned once again. Tactics is the beginning of other creators who are not Black Isle taking parts of Fallout and keeping them not because they understand their meaning, but because it's cool. It's frustrating at times, but that's the thing. I gotta hand it to all Fallouts. It certainly is pretty cool. Along with that, what has helped maintain my appreciation for this game is it might not wholly understand the property, but it knows enough to throw ideas at it. Some of them interesting, and many of them, I want to say, harmless. Yeah, I guess you could do that. Just try not to get it on the verge. It's such an obsessive nerd. Like Fallout Tactics is a bull in a china shop. Just sit still! Don't touch anything! Also, the isometric games were often pretty funny. Even this one had time to set up some classic nihilistic Fallout goofs. One moment that got me pretty good was during a rescue mission of sorts. You can find a super mutant locked up in a cell, and if you free him, he launches into this inspiring speech about taking the fight to the enemy, getting revenge for this injustice. Yeah, let's get them! Let's give these motherfuckers a war! I don't think the first-person Fallouts are all that funny, but a large part of that, in my opinion, is that it's battling to express a complicated thing through its game engine. An engine that often produces funnier moments simply by breaking every 5 minutes, as opposed to their genuine attempts at being witty or sardonic. But to be fair, Tactics has a number of edgy, smelly storylines that kind of just happen to me.
My ass has seen more rubber than a dead rat in the middle of Route 66.
Yeah, hi, my name is...
In keeping with the barrier to entry that Fallout 1 and 2 held, Fallout Tactics changes up the format and creates new off-putting things to keep you from taking the plunge and seeing one of these games through to the end. With a new focus on tactical combat, Chris Taylor wanted to amend a common complaint for the previous games: companions, and more specifically, your inability to control them or get them to stop either shooting you or getting shot by you. Right from the start here, I'll tell you, they don't really accomplish that. That will be a persistent challenge in itself, but you have options that will help you mitigate that, and new features to play around with to fine-tune your experience. Much like the game's plot, there is a lot about Fallout Tactics' the devil gameplay that I think works, that feels right, and more that will test your patience, and an equal amount that is left unfinished. Digging deeper into its cut content and the notes left in the game files, you really get a feel for how many ideas were just left in the dust for the greater good of the mission. We're talking vital, key figures in this squad, left in the trenches, clutching a photo of their best gal, whispering, "Well, it looks like I ain't gonna make it home, Charlie." Looking at it now, I see their loss. I see the strange outline where something once stood. Including your player character, you get a squad of 6 Brotherhood initiates that all have the same amount of depth as any other Fallout character, almost to a fault. They have their own stats, traits, perks, and inventory that you have full control over. You might be thinking, well, if there's no dialogue options, then why do you have a charisma skill? That determines which potential squad mates you have access to. Then you might ask yourself, well, why does everybody else have charisma? And to that I would say, what are you gonna do, remove the C? Then what's the fun acronym gonna be? Sepia? The worst part about this is that I know, even when it's done, it's not going to be funny. I'm working for something that will have no payoff. I forgot about the L. You decide your squad by visiting a personnel building at one of the Brotherhood bunkers. As you progress, you'll unlock more and more possible squad mates that each have a proficiency, utility, and terrifying profile pick to be mindful of. It's probably best practice to have certain roles covered at all times, like heavy gunners, a medic, a mechanic, and a sniper, but you can also mix and match these as you see fit. Unlike you, if any of these guys die, it's not a game over. You just have to decide if you want to live without them and lug all their shit back home, or load the game. This may also be the most diverse Fallout game as far as playable characters. You are sort of forced into the role of a basic human, but you can also recruit super mutants, ghouls, robots, and even Deathclaw into your squad. The bunkers are also where you can trade for new supplies and upgrades, as well as store your loot or vehicles in between missions. One of the more noteworthy scars left by content cuts are the appearance of Brotherhood medics. Each bunker has one, and they are even given spoken dialogue, where they in pretty clear terms explain to you what purpose they serve in the game, as if they were a tutorial, or rather what purpose they would have served if any of that functionality was left. At some stage in production, medics were going to be one of the main ways you heal major injuries or radiation poisoning, and they'd each have varying degrees of skill, with some being borderline butchers that you'd be rolling the dice with by even letting them check your pulse. As they stand in the finished game, they are essentially health item vendors. In one of the most biting yet unintentional bits of commentary, you hand over your hard-earned money for something other nations provide for free. There are 3 combat modes to choose from that you can cycle through at will. The first is what arguably got the game made, and what arguably is its most broken as well, CBT. CTB, or continuous turn-based, real-time essentially, but still using action points determined by agility. So it's less real-time and more like the rules are still happening just autonomously and without waiting for invisible dice rolls. Since you can turn this on and off, there are many circumstances where you can come out on top of a fight by barring your squad from entering combat until they are all split up behind cover or on some high ground, and then turn it on and watch them mow down a group of enemies. The game's verticality is an on-the-surface, small evolution of Fallout 1 and 2, but actually really significant the more you think about it. The game takes into account your height and awards you an advantage. It also changes level design so you can climb down into subterranean areas like trenches, or climb up and post squad mates overlooking a battle from a ledge or a platform. Another new addition affected by this is that each squad mate has a changeable stance, like crouched and prone to switch between, which opens up many other tactical options. You can have a sniper lying prone while sneaking on top of a building overlooking a field, while your heavy dudes stroll in, and your support characters crouch behind sandbags and debris, emerging to give cover fire. You can also, outside of combat, just lob grenades to flush out hidden characters, which pretty often will just wind up exploding them rather extravagantly. The second mode is individual turn-based, which is very similar to the way the original games did combat, where you just go down the line of all combatants until it comes around to your turn again. This is the option I wound up using the least, instead opting for a combination of CTB and the third option, squad turn-based, where once combat is initiated, you get to move around all your little dudes in whatever order you wish, and then the computer gets its turn to move around everyone else. I will say, I can't think of many other games beyond maybe Stalker or something that gave me this much enjoyment whiplash. I don't know how to express to you how much fun parts of this game were for me. It's a rather long game, considering what it is. It took me like a good week of playing it pretty consistently to get through it, and even when I wasn't playing it, I was thinking about playing it. I was having isometric dreams, where I'd engage in some mundane daily behavior just governed by action points. It was insane. I'm insane. I'm a detriment to society. Kill me! The other side of the coin is that parts of it were completely demoralizing. I was at numerous times just defeated emotionally, physically, psychically, by Fallout Tactics for a number of reasons. It's one of those games where you're never quite sure if you're playing it correctly until you look up a walkthrough with the thought, okay, how was I actually supposed to do this? And they describe more or less what you did. The thing that felt like some weird cheat to cheese an enemy you're not actually capable of killing was what most other people decided to do as well. Not saying that didn't just legitimately happen as well, but so much of playing this game felt like tricking it into letting you win. You can also just get torn to shreds in a fucking instant, even if you have power armor and cover. Someone could be holed up in a trench with some kind of laser Gatling gun and just violently turn your buddy into a puddle, and it's weirdly shocking and sad when you pair that with how much work you do to strategically keep your dudes alive. Speaking of power armor, one thing I've always weirdly respected about this game is that it simply doesn't make power armor a big part of it. Even though the entire time you're in the Brotherhood of Steel and they have iconic power armor, that's like their thing, that's what they've made their personality out of. It drives home that having that is a special thing that not just any dirty recruit fresh out of the wastes gets to use. It's not until the final few missions that you can even afford to outfit more than one of your dudes with it. So there's a real sense of accomplishment when you get there. But the more guys you have with the armor, the more you can farm loot for money and thus afford more suits. Something further aided by something I initially thought nothing of, but wound up having a blast with, and that's the vehicles you have access to. You don't often get to use vehicles in actual missions, but you are required to travel to new missions and bunkers using the world map, and this will move along much more quickly if you have a vehicle. My favorite was the Armored Personnel Carrier, which is a slow-moving tank of sorts that holds all of your guys inside it, and all of them can shoot out the windows. So in order to farm money and less common supplies, I just cruise around as a roving death machine, blasting anyone that got close to me, sitting comfortably in my car while everyone around me melts. Unless they break it, then I gotta get out and make my mechanic fix it back up. Then once the area was cleared, I'd send a dude or two out to gather all their shit and stuff it inside the APC, which doubles as a mobile items locker. I really found myself enjoying this loop of murder, collecting, car maintenance, and inventory management.
I got a little surprise for these mutant freaks. Carmageddon, motherfuckers!
Yeah, that's me. Always getting into something. But you gotta know when to hold them. And, well, I never quite remembered the other part of that. Anyway, I guess you're probably wondering how.
Even if you have been exposed to excessive fallout, you may eat and drink just as you normally would.
There are a few places I imagine you weren't meant to bring your vehicle, like this trench combat level, that I did anyway because I'm quirky like that. I would also just run over my dudes, mostly on purpose, because, you know, something to do out there. Since Micro Forte did cave to some Fallout fan demands, there is some fun stuff to discover by just exploring all corners of the world map. These appropriately include a bunch of wacky joke scenes and pop culture references, including references to other Interplay games. You can find Mort, your floating skull companion from Planescape, wandering around cursing the name of someone that sent him through a portal there. You can also kill him. You can find some gamers talking in era-appropriate leet speak, and you can also kill them. What about a traveling Nuka-Cola salesman that you can shoot?
Bro, did you kill all these people yourself? What the fuck? I don't like this. The vibe's off.
There is plenty of time spent outside of combat, and even though it is a problem in combat, outside of combat, you'll more frequently have to deal with one of the game's biggest annoyances, your squad's pathfinding. I can't remember a moment of this game where my dudes were just doing exactly what I wanted them to do. Standing in a decent formation that didn't result in them shooting each other, successfully climbing stairs or a ladder, or just not taking a bizarre meandering walk over to the spot a yard from where they were standing before. It can feel pretty gratifying nailing an enemy with a critical hit, especially in turn-based where you can actually comprehend what's happening. But sometimes I would get annoyed that if your squad is split up, as they might reasonably be, especially on one of the levels where you have to defend a base with several entrances, the camera will quickly whip away from what you're doing to go to the next person before your action is even done sometimes. So every now and then I wouldn't even get to see the destruction I've wrought.
Welcome to Earth. Wait, where are you going? Ow. I missed it. Why did I say welcome to Earth?
There's a lot that could have been done to tighten up some basic mechanics, but as I understand it, it was notoriously difficult to QA test for. And yeah, it still feels like it needed that. It doesn't feel like the game it could have been by any means, and more so the game they had when the data ship arrived. I still think there's a lot of fun to be had in it, and some great ideas that advance the originals. It also feels like a really logical progression of power. You start out with cheap leather armor and old world guns, which in itself is sorta unseen in other Fallout games. Even in Bethesda's Fallout games, they have fun inventing an arsenal that mixes future designs and homemade duct tape and nails type weaponry, while many of the starting weapons and tactics are just real guns that I think realistically, wouldn't have gone anywhere. Sure, they might be a bit scuffed and rusty, but you can still kill people with them. Then as you rise in the ranks, you start getting access to heavier weapons and armor, as well as sniper rifles, and the game feels so drastically different with these resources. Of course, the difficulty also steadily increases, so unless you really follow a specific grind to the end, you never really feel over-prepared or unstoppable. You could equip one of your dudes with power armor and a minigun, but you're also gonna burn through ammo for that really fast, so should you use all your carry weight to hold more ammo, or a backup weapon that you'll likely find more ammo for? And what if you're up against enemies that aren't as affected by traditional ammo? There's a lot to consider and manage that I honestly had a blast with. Some of this is by design, and some of it is busy work created by game design missteps that the devs have owned up to. This may be the Fallout game with the most options as far as weaponry. Including melee and thrown weapons, there are over 150. There are so many different guns you'll come across, from downed enemies and lockers and chests. You'll be holding armfuls of them, laughing to yourself, what do I even do with all these? And ammo, what do I even do with all these different ammo types? I've never even seen a gun that can shoot these. What do I do with all this? No, I'm serious. What do I do with all this shit? You can find so many different guns that are more or less the same thing. They have the same stats, they just require some obscure ass ammo type that nobody will ever drop. You could maybe buy it from a vendor, but more often than not, you'd go up to them like, do you have 44 Magnum ammo? And they'll say, what the fuck are you even talking about, you worm, you sniveling weasel? And I'd say, oh, okay, sorry to bother you, sir. Even if you find some back alley ammo dealer, you'd just run out of it 10 minutes later and probably immediately find something to replace it on the floor that has a more common ammo type. I don't know what the rationale behind adding so many pointless and redundant gun options was, because ultimately what you'll end up using is what you come across the most. The forces you fight typically stick to one or two weapon ammo types, weapons, and then the odd specialty weapon like a rocket launcher or a machine gun will pop up for a surprise. Basic 9mm and 7.62mm ammo was so plentiful that I'd wind up just dropping handfuls of them as I picked up more important or more expensive shit. I'd literally use these to obsessively balance the scales of my weight limit. Just pick up something that made me encumbered and then flick aside bullet by bullet until I could move again. And you know what? I loved every fucking second of it. It's an odd appreciation I have for this game in that I feel like all the things I try to sell you on are things that are understandably frustrating, annoying, or tedious. But it's like once you break through that and find that you've adequately planned for a certain circumstance or successfully triggered some kind of maneuver, ooh, it's like little else. You also develop a sort of camaraderie with your squad. You become protective of them and good at utilizing their strengths.
Hey, he's attacking that lady! Light him up, boys! No need to thank us, ma'am. It's all in
I get it, okay? I know you're angry with me. I know you hate looking at this game optimized for widescreen. Honestly, I'm not crazy about it either. You think I want to strain my eyes? Flip my Coke bottle glasses up and down trying to make sense of what all these little critters are doing on my screen? Well, I can't turn back time. Actually, I think I installed a patch and forgot that I did because the Steam version wasn't recording properly. Either way, just picture this game like zoomed in. I know you can't do that for me, but I want you to try anyway. As someone that already adored isometric games with pre-rendered environments, this game is a non-stop delight to look at. It takes the aesthetic of Fallout 1 and upscales it, making the assets not only more clear, but more varied and plentiful. Even with some desert or snow areas clearly tiled a little cheaply, there is so much detail and care put into what populates them. They even threw in a little dig at that process through graffiti. And when you walk under certain obstructions, you can watch them grow for some reason. I feel like we could have found a more elegant solution for that, like they become faintly transparent, like in Diablo or something. But since level design takes strategic combat into consideration, even basic raider bases or improvised camps are littered with rusted out cars, corrugated metal bound in barbed wire, and assorted piles of junk to take cover behind. Little touches of animation breathe a lot of life into these places through trash can fires and bubbling puddles of toxic slime. I'm just so enamored by it, even when it's lazy, it's good. There's a day and night cycle that I don't know how to track exactly, but you can start a mission during the middle of the day, and by the end of it the sun will have set and light sources will emit a lovely atmospheric glow. Even if you engage in a fight with laser weapons, each beam of light fired will light a path to your enemy. It's a little consideration that if they forgot, I probably wouldn't have even noticed, but they didn't, and because of that, I'll put off the inevitable for one more day. Level design really gets shown off whenever you're in a Brotherhood bunker or one of the robot facilities. They look almost mesmerizingly industrial and alien compared to the rest of the landscape. In part lifeless, not meant for human manipulation, but also slightly flourished in an Art Deco kind of way. And because you see so much on screen at one time, it felt like looking at one of those educational cross-section books from when I was a kid where they like show a detailed drawing of a boat or a castle or some shit, cut it in half so you can see all the inner workings. But you're a bunch of little dudes running around in it. Little guys that can die in horrifying ways. That's definitely one thing that stayed with me from the first time playing it until now. Maybe it's this sorta detached bird's eye view of everyone, but your little guys get fucked up. And it's really gnarly. Well, so do all the dudes you kill. The death animations are extravagant, and there's a variety of them, depending on what kind of weapon you're using. You can snipe dudes, making them twirl around with an intense arterial spray, making an arc of blood around them, or straight split them in half with a hail of machine gun fire, blow them up into little bits, melt them with plasma weapons. It's amazing. I mean, it's horrific. It's vile. My little guys, my little dudes, just getting squished like ants. I just want to set the world on fire. No God in the sky. We will wither and die. Inside my heart there is just piss.
guess you could say my heart is made of piss. So fucking stupid.
Until they make you kill dogs, of course, because they saw fit to make that every bit as unpleasantly rendered. One point of contention with OG Fallout fans was the liberties taken with creating variation among models, specifically with models like the super mutants. For whatever reason, Microforte thought a good way to differentiate them from each other would be to give them vibrantly colored accents, which looks a little odd, but it is such a small infraction among other pressing things that I couldn't be bothered to give a shit. The real concern is the lack of rats, and speaking of which, that's right, it's the rat roundup. If you're a fan of rats and are looking for something to fill the rat-shaped hole in your life, to slake your thirst for rat content in a video game, well, Fallout Tactics might not be the best place to look. There isn't much in the way of classic rats, scurrying around doing their thing while you adventure, squeaking and such, transferring slices of pizza to their subterranean lair. What we do get is the occasional random encounter with big enemy mutant rats that don't quite look rat enough to positively affect their score on the rat roundup. However, in the rat roundup, we treat all rats equally, and therefore I award Fallout Tactics my highest rat roundup rating. Good! Voice acting is all mostly very good. Professionally done by recognizable voice actors you've definitely heard in other games. And the odd stunt casting.
Look, I don't want to die. Get this fucking rig off me! Do it, Grunts! You guys are expendable, I'm senior!
There just isn't much of it, mostly due to the fact that the game had to be shipped worldwide on day one, so the script had to be locked down pretty early so it could be translated. This unfortunately minimized the use of voice acting and left a number of inconsistencies with it, as well as typos. Like most Fallout games, Ron Perlman returns as the narrator and is also given a lot more to narrate than usual, as each arc of the game gets its own little cutscene introduction featuring him and some animatics. But the other notable roles include Arlie Ermey as General Barnaky, a guy who you've probably seen or heard in some piece of media, likely as a military guy of some sort. Anything from Full Metal Jacket to Toy Story to any number of commercials. He has since passed on, but I'm sure he's looking up at us and not remembering doing this job at all.
Somebody picked the wrong house.
He does his thing, though there are times where he doesn't really sound like his heart's in it. Maybe he was making a choice here to show that Barnaky is like a conflicted kind of guy, but he just sounds spaced out a lot of the time and like he is quite literally just reading words on a paper.
Welcome, warrior. We now know that the Beast Lord's lair lies within an underground labyrinth in the region of Mardin. The Beast Lord's lair lies within...
General Decker is played by Kurtwood Smith, who you may know from movies like RoboCop and a bunch of Star Trek shit. I don't know, what am I fucking IMDb? He does a perfectly serviceable job.
If they have information about any weak links in our security, we will find out. If they don't, they will be placed in a labor camp to prevent the spread of rumors and ensure proper security.
Everyone else, zero complaints, and most of them pull double or even triple duty, voicing several characters, some of which have names. The soundtrack for this game is interesting, and unlike the previous two, it is not composed by Mark Morgan, but another guy now synonymous with Fallout, Enon Zur, who would go on to do all the soundtracks for Fallout going forward from Fallout 3. What makes it interesting is that it sounds very much like a clear collision of his own work and Mark Morgan's previous work on the other Fallout games. So much so that it may as well be a fucking collab. It sounds like it's using the same palette as the other games. It's a little tribal and ghostly sounding with lots of hand percussion and voices. This is mostly during the explorative moments outside of combat, but since this is a game centered around combat, you're more likely to hear another set of tracks infused with a little more energy and cinematic flair. This really shines in tracks like the ones used during the Super Mutant levels. It's got this grander sound to it with brass and a bit of electric guitar. but it's still kinda unpredictable and full of dread, like it would be more fitting in a horror movie than an action movie. Game. Why did I write movie? I'm talking about game. But it's all so fitting with this iteration of Fallout. And you could swap out some of these ambient tracks with any of the ones from Fallout 1 or 2, and the difference would be unrecognizable, which I started saying as a compliment, but I am now realizing that it doesn't sound like one. You compare it to what Enon did for Fallout 3, and it's like night and day, as that Mark Morgan influence is all but gone, replaced by competently done, but often generic movie score kind of stuff that's not really my jam. Tell you what might be my jam, I think I'm coming around to this playlist.
This is my favorite part.
Yeah, I guess I can see why. It's got like a certain texture to it.
Yes.
You ever fuck with like noise or power electronics? Oh, just a moment. Hello. Mm-hmm. Okay, understood. Well, I guess my break's over and I gotta finish up this video, even though I feel like I'm getting nowhere with this script. Let's see. I feel like you've learned a lot of sort of intimate personal details about me in the making of this video. My preferences in a Fallout game, and it's like I have the equivalent of foot stuff or something. In any case, I think Fallout Tactics has received a lot of misplaced hatred or disregard. Assuming there would be many others that shared my feelings on this, I came across a lot of really dismissive language around the game, repeating that joke you're likely to see in other fandoms, where they say something like, and Fallout Tactics doesn't exist, or and we don't talk about Fallout Tactics. But I feel like it deserves to be talked about a little bit more so than there still being bad reviews of the game. It's more common that people seem to just parrot that it's the worst or one of the worst, without really playing it, just kind of trusting like, yeah, it looks like it's probably the worst, I guess it is. Does it fuck up the Fallout lore? Yeah, a little bit, but so do other Fallout games. Is its gameplay a little janky? Yeah, a little bit, but so are other Fallout games. Bethesda games, famously not janky. Okay, its heart is in the right place, and it works overtime and likely through crunch to make a worthy entry into a legendary franchise and even address a few things it thought the series could improve on. Of course, many other issues developed to replace them due to Interplay's insistence that they get something, anything on the shelf as soon as possible in order to toss a glass of water onto their burning house. Inconsistencies and little goofs aside, it feels like more of a genuine Fallout adventure to me than some of the numbered sequels. A lot of what it adds to the lore is a little uninspired, but it clearly understands most of the building blocks, the important notes to hit, and in my opinion, it hits them. In an identical speech I could give about the first two Fallouts, there is a learning curve to get past, and if you're not accustomed to this type of game or just older games, it could understandably just be one of those things where your eyes glaze over and you desperately pine for something with recognizable mechanics, something colorful with big button prompts on screen to placate the baby that you are. I'm joking! I'm telling a joke. Based on true events. I'm just saying it's not as scary and unapproachable as it may come off, and there are a bunch of ways to ease yourself into its gameplay. You can, at will, change the difficulty and combat settings. You can even save scum if you want to, and I know you want to. These are all things that I think it's just universally understood you should do. It's practically part of the basic gameplay. I was mostly playing it in squad turn-based until I felt confident enough in my dudes to mostly play in continuous turn-based. In certain cases, I would just turn all my dudes to aggressive and just immediately gun down anything that popped up from behind cover, and it's a pretty good feeling. Then you can switch back only when you feel like a threat could overwhelm your guys. I also don't think you need some extensive knowledge of RTS games or anything. I'm not at all a tactics guy, by any stretch, which may explain why I enjoyed this game. If you're gonna play this, don't play XCOM. Don't know anything about tactics games. Strike that from your memory. Hit yourself with a cudgel of some kind. At the time of my writing this, the most recent Fallout game is still Fallout 76, and the next one lies far in the horizon beyond Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6, which is As of yet, still just a logo, but it's clear that Fallout is once again changed, in a new transitional period where it has to make a firm choice about where it's going. It means something else entirely to a whole new audience that cares little for this forgotten affront to a dead idea of Fallout. I think that is sort of freeing, if nothing else. There's better Fallouts and worse Fallouts, perhaps one for everyone. I feel like right about now is where I would cap this off with some kind of overarching point or thesis, but no, I just kind of find it amusing how splintered Fallout's fandom is because it's gone through so many changes over the course of 20 plus years. It's had a dozen new controversies and divides, and I'm still here defending the shitty one from 2001. Anyway, if you can move past one of my bad takes to see this good take I have here, I hope you give this game a shot, or at least think of it a little more kindly, or at the very least, watch this video until the end. Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching the video. It's over now. If you liked it, do something about it by liking it, commenting, subscribing, so forth. Looking at links in the description to other ways you can support, like Patreon and Twitter and Discord and others. As always, an extra special thanks to and I'm shortening this considerably. As fun as it is, I'm sure many people didn't like that there was approaching 15 minutes of me saying names. But special thanks to Ailing Uncle, 2Password for Kids, Assisi, that's my guess, please let me know how wrong that was, Again Dean, Alex Raymond, Alexander Smith, Andre Perkins, Aparts 89, Bayard Brown, Benjamin Sid Perez, Big Abuela Energy. But clearly, even though her name was Crystal, she was not very clear and open with communication. Crystal, I don't know if that's a quote from something, or you're just going through one, buddy. Close Quarter Wombat, D-Sky, Daphne Pittendry, Dark Raptor 86, Deluminati, Dr. Beard, DOS Days, Edgy, Edward Avila, Fart Mother, Game Master, Gaming with Clarp Tarp, Gamma, J. Oliver. I just hate video games. I just hate video games, man. What the heck? Parapod.
Awaiting command.
What's going on around here? Do I have another ghost? Or maybe a succubus? Have my summoning rituals worked?
Scanning. Scan complete.
Okay, and?
Would you like to view the scan results?
Yeah.
Please verify this account.
How do I do that?
Click on the man in the red and white striped shirt.
What? I can't. This is gonna take forever. I'm not doing this.
Worth a shot. Anyway, I think you've got a demon.
What? A demon? That's bad, right?
Oh yeah, I recorded this EVP for you to review.
Oh, great. Let's hear it.
Hi, it's me. I'm not really a demon. I'm more of an orc. You can call me Gordon if you like. Anyway, I'll be haunting you for a while. If you have any questions, then, I don't know. Bye.
Huh. Didn't expect him to be so cordial.
Should I initiate my spectral cleansing routines?
Nah, let him cook. Maybe he'll liven things up around here. It's fine, it's whatever. Okay. Vagrant Story is an isometric action RPG hybrid and Pokemon, but the Pokemon are medieval instruments of war simulator, and it was both developed and published by Square for the Sony PlayStation in the year 2000. It was subsequently released for the PS3 and PSP in 2009, and then the PS Vita in 2012, though that hardly matters now that Sony no longer provides support for any of those consoles. The good news, at the moment it is morally free. Production for Vagrant Story began in January of 1998 when its director, Yasumi Matsuno, had grown tired of producing sequels or games locked into preconceived worlds and wanted to create a new IP. So a team of 30 swelled to a team of 50 over the course of what he described to be a very collaborative writing process. According to an interview in Vagrant Story Ultimania, a companion book released only in Japan, after years spent making tactical RPGs at the behest of upper management, such as Ogre Tactics and Final Fantasy Tactics, this was the first time he was given the green light to work on anything he wanted. Knowing the safe bet would have been Final Fantasy Tactics 2, he consulted his staff, who made him realize that this project would likely be the last time any of them worked on a game for the Sony PlayStation, as its successor was looming over the horizon along with Nintendo's Dolphin, their cancelled Sea-Punk-themed console that was then reworked as the GameCube. And alongside gaming's special little guy, we're putting him in the gifted and talented education program. He's gonna go far in life. Do not bully my son! Sega's Dreamcast. Thinking that their team, who had only ever worked on 2D games, better start getting with the times now, the decision was made to push the sundowning console to its limit with 3D technology. Spurring them on was the release of Metal Gear Solid, a game that became their yardstick to measure up to visually, and for its immersive qualities. So much so that Matsuno claimed he experienced a phenomenon called Metal Gear Shock. Shortly after reeling from Metal Gear Shock, Matsuno would meet Hideo Kojima in just about the most quintessentially Kojima circumstance. That is, standing in line for 8 hours to see a screening of John Carpenter's Vampires. While they waited in line, they became fast friends due to their shared love of film and would recount this meeting a year later in a recorded conversation wherein Kojima admits he had always been impressed by Matsuno's output and experienced a similar shock upon seeing Vagrant Story for the first time. At the end of this conversation, these two auteurs ask what each other have been working on, and both wax poetic about pushing the envelope with their new projects, breaking new ground in this unknowable precipice the gaming industry finds itself precariously perched upon, with numerous technological innovations and online capabilities waiting in the wings. So naturally, they both directed Game Boy sequels. Development of Vagrant Story required the team to learn a dozen new skill sets, which perhaps contributed to it falling short of their ambitions. In interviews since, a few developers have implied that nearly half the game's planned content was cut. Deep dives into character backstories, whole mechanics like a party system, and further graphical detail were shaved off as the team sort of hit the ceiling with what the console was capable of and what they could afford after 2 years of production. A few months before launch, the game would be delayed further, with a marketing blitz occurring in the interim. Squaresoft gave Vagrant Story the white glove treatment. We're talking TV spots.
Vagrant Story, rated T for teen.
We're talking an official comic book. We're talking magazine ads every month, and an appearance at E3 2000, featuring a booth decorated by massive statues of the game's lead characters, that the folks in this video look at for a few seconds before being distracted by a booth babe and creepily zooming in on them from a distance, such is the case with literally every bit of E3 footage I've ever looked at in my goddamn life. This is a phenomenon that, when I was younger, more naive about the game industry, I read as faith. I read this as belief in a product. Why would they put this on TV and all over my GamePros if they didn't think this was the coolest thing they had made? Missing the grim truth that this was also a poison administered to Vagrant Story's future. Propping it up so extravagantly meant racking up a tab that it was meant to make back, and then some, and as much as I can feign exasperation at this timeline we live in, where Vagrant Story did not become a long-running series, and I can watch, shit dude, this fucking sucks dude, I'm quite certain its longer than average at the time development cycle and absurd marketing budget were the culprits. On release, Vagrant Story was near universally praised, and even though it had to contend with two other largely successful Square releases, it still sold considerably well and raked in glowing reviews. GamePro would give it 5s across the board, complimenting nearly every aspect of the game, and rounds out their coverage by pining for a sequel, writing, "From the opening cinema to the dramatic and twisted twisty conclusion, Vagrant Story hits all the right notes. RPG fans are in for the adventure of a lifetime with this medieval romp. Hopefully this is only the first installment of a fine saga. You'd be hard-pressed to find a published review that strayed from the others, even if there were genuine points of criticism leveled at the game's learning curve and mixed bag of game mechanics. While still effervescent and already referring to Vagrant Story as a classic, PSM's review comes with more caveats than others, maligning its repetitive gameplay and bland environments that become more and more apparent as the story thins in the game's middle. Riley concluding, "Definitely buy this one if you're big into micromanaging massive inventories, charting mazes, and figuring out the exact best spot to hit a lizard man." Despite being very popular overseas, Vagrant Story would never receive a sequel, something that Matsuno makes clear that he would absolutely have done if he was allowed to. But he also implies that he knew from the beginning that it was unlikely. The real triumph was that Square at large saw the game as proof that they could have renewed success in the world of 3D. In his closing thoughts for his interview in Vagrant Story Ultimania, he says that it's okay that the game won't get a sequel because elements from it will live on if they get to make an online game. Which is strange because it is true that this happened, and just an oddly specific shot to call, because it wouldn't come to fruition for almost 20 years. But hey, set realistic goals, I suppose. Reference to elements of Vagrant Story would appear in the next game he would write, Final Fantasy XII, and plot elements that were set aside for the possibility of a sequel were used in Square's second stab at a Final Fantasy MMO, officially incorporating Vagrant Story's plot into the universe of Final Fantasy, immortalizing it forever, until that game gets shut down, as all live services shall one day be. In 1971, Japanese engineer Fujio Masuoka, having just received his doctorate from Tohoku University, was hired by Toshiba, a company that would become known for inventing a number of consumer goods, most notably electronics. During Masuoka's time there, novelties such as the technology to make two-way color video phone calls would be developed. He would amass well over 200 registered patents for all manner of gadgets and gizmos. Toshiba as a company would weather years of controversy following his exit, including accusations of overstating their pre-tax profit by hundreds of billions of yen. Also the creation of HD DVD, a video format meant to fill untended baskets in the middle of CVS pharmacies. Were you to dig beneath the pile of go-backs obscuring its contents, you may be rewarded with an HD DVD copy of $1 Million Baby or some comparable media. Which development was more of an embarrassment? Well, that's not for me to say.
The reputation of Toshiba has been blasted.
One of the most substantial contributions Masuoka would make to the tech industry was the invention of stacked gate avalanche injection metal oxide semiconductor memory. In layman's terms, like a rock that remembers numbers real good. This invention, built on work that can be traced all the way back to the late 1950s, would culminate years later in a primitive form of dynamic random access memory, or DRAM, the basis for what we now call flash memory, a non-volatile method of computer memory storage, referred to as such because it doesn't require an electric charge to maintain its memory. Rather, information is kept stored using a floating gate transistor that stores an isolated charge for an impressively long period of time. It wouldn't be until around 2002 that the flash drive, or thumb drive if that's how you've chosen to live your life, was created. Early flash drives had comparatively small storage space, often less than a single gigabyte in those days. It wasn't until 2011 that we'd start seeing larger, sleeker, and sexier USB flash drive models, such as the tasteful SanDisk Cruiser. Look at this reliable and secure little 8 gigabyte. But by 2013, those rookie numbers would be bumped up considerably, as the need for flash drives at all would wane in the advent of storage technologies such as cloud storage. Despite this, Toshiba would continue to develop drives up to a terabyte in size, a leap in capability that would seem like magic in 1971. Just a year later, a flash drive model such as this would be discovered by the employee of a medieval-themed dinner theater chain, the contents of which containing information sensitive to an American video game development company, and its owner, who was already embroiled in 2 unrelated lawsuits. Perhaps enjoying a maiden's kiss or some other specialty drink contained in a commemorative glass, the USB stick tumbled to the restaurant's faux wooden flooring, and the corporate documents concerning unreleased versions of Borderlands and MP4 of a cam girl performing a bodily function banned in some countries along with it. For a moment, it sat there, amidst the shuffling feet of tourists, teetering between 2 worlds, just as the fate of the pseudo-Spanish kingdom hinges on which different colored knight you cheer on in the royal court of medieval times. A meeting of fantasy and history not dissimilar to Vagrant Story, in a pseudo-medieval country called Valendia, where the line between government and religion has blurred and a shadowy cabal seems to be pulling the strings of both in lockstep. A new faction has thrown down the gauntlet, upsetting the established order. Also, everyone just goes straight ass out in this world. In a game that already requires a lot of your attention, Square pulls one of the most bizarre feats of obtuse storytelling before you even press new game, in that the 4-minute expository cutscene that plainly lays out the cast of characters, including our protagonist, and the inciting incident that kicks off his main mission, could simply be missed because it doesn't play unless you stop in the main menu and sit there for 20 seconds or so. If you button mash past this to blast through all the UI garbage and get straight to hardcore gaming, you'll be tossed in media res to our guy appearing at the place doing the thing. The details? Go fuck yourself. If, however, you, I don't know, got a push notification for an app you don't use and momentarily felt a pang of excitement as you thought someone remembered to text you on your birthday, for example, and you looked away from the screen while lingering on the main menu, you'd learn that our protagonist is Ashley Riot. I don't know his real name, but he's chosen to have people refer to him by his scene name, and I'll respect that decision. Ashley is a member of the VKP, or Valendia Knights of the Peace, a military man in the employ of Parliament. More than that, however, he belongs to a sort of special forces division called Risk Breakers, Lone Wolf Infiltrators, Equalizers, Serious Fuckers. Several hours before this moment, former Parliament member Duke Bardorba's manor was attacked, and his family held hostage by a group deemed a terrorist cult called Muhlenkamp, led by a metal-armed magic user named Sidney Losterot. This is strange because it is known that the Duke has been funding Muhlenkamp's effort in between pulling the strings of Parliament. The cult has made demands that their captured comrades be freed and that the current cardinal of the priesthood of Saint Iocus abdicate his throne. Doubly strange, the Order of the Crimson Blade, the church's military arm, has shown up to intervene without clearing this mission with anyone, seemingly gone rogue to hunt down Sidney and thwart whatever plan he's got up his sleeve that he would have if he ever wore a shirt. It's a strange introduction to our hero because he's so clearly a lapdog for this fascist-coded VKP council that really just wants this encroaching faith defeated before it instills doubt in the church, not even willing to entertain the idea of freeing those they've rounded up for following Sidney. One of them slams his fist on the table, condemning the religious freedom they've allowed for too long. The Grand Steward asks that outburst be stricken from the record, and his chair responds,
"Yes, my lord."
Ashley, along with a rookie VKP inquisitor named Kahlo Merlose, I'm realizing I've never said any of these names out loud, and some of them do seem to be sort of multicultural, but I'm an American, so I'm gonna do what we do best and mispronounce things in a funny way.
sure do love drinking out of this here aluminum can. Anyway, they're sent by the VKP to investigate what the heck this is all about. Merlot informs Ashley that even though Muhlenkamp has taken the manor, the Duke himself wasn't even home when this happened. He was off in some other part of the Greylands, recovering from an illness. The Crimson Blades show up in record time, led by a dangerous swordsman named Romeo Guildenstern. Don't laugh, it's not funny. Ashley sneaks in and eavesdrops on a conversation between Sidney and his second-in-command, one of two characters with a human name, John Hardin. They are looking for something that's meant to be here, something the Duke was supposed to have, but Hardin doubts that this thing is even a thing. With the odds no longer in their favor, they agree to cut their losses and just leave with the Duke's son, Joshua. This is when Ashley swaggers in looking to shut this whole operation down and stop Sidney from finding the thing. We get a good look at this elaborate tattoo on Sidney's back as well. When he refuses to cooperate, Ashley shoots Sidney with a crossbow, which proves to barely faze him. He orders Hardin to leave for Liamond before summoning a dragon and making a break for it. Elsewhere, and sometime later, the Duke is briefed by a former risk-breaker named Jan Rosenkrantz on the situation at his manor. Proving his allegiance to Sidney and Muhlenkamp and implicating himself in some kind of conspiracy to some unknown end, he orders that his manor be burned to the ground by one of his own men in the armor of the Cardinal's blades, pinning the attack solely on the church, and any witnesses of Sidney or the dragon he summoned be killed. Jan is sent to Liamond and ordered to deal with Sidney, the Blades, and whichever risk breakers are sent by Parliament, in this case Ashley and Kahlo once again. Sorry, just making sure nobody was looking. Setting the stage for our cast to all meet up again on the ruined island where Liamond sits. Not really fancying himself as a writer, but nonetheless thrust into the role of one, Yasubi Matsuno penned an outline for Vagrant Story that he describes using the same language one describes in understated indie film, opting for the tone of a smaller scale and personal film rather than the louder blockbuster writing of Final Fantasy. Its plot would be presented in fragments and the player left to draw their own conclusion. But the themes recurring in both Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy Tactics are clear. Class division, faith as a cudgel, and power corrupting absolutely. All things he apparently began thinking about when he was first hired at Square, which is a funny, interesting thing that Square proceeded to then publish in their own book. He describes the writing style in Vagrant Story using this hand-waving dismissive wording like, yeah, we'll just try this kind of thing, I don't know. Might spice up the dry fantasy jargon. The idea of an RPG story told mostly in essentially disparate movie scenes that hop around between an interesting cast of characters is either accidentally brilliant or Matsuno was just overly humble in describing his process. In that conversation between him and Kojima explains the creative impulse in the both of them as essentially film head brain rot, and I think you can see that reverence for the language of film all over Vagrant Story. Hours later, Ashley and Kahlo arrive outside Liamond and determine the safest passage to the island is through a tunnel the once bustling city used as a wine cellar. Downstairs, Ashley makes it clear that he plans to go alone, as he's the only one of them who has any combat experience, and there are already signs of battle. So Kahlo gives him the rundown of what the VKP thinks is going on. There is reason enough to believe that Muhlenkamp is some kind of front for Bardorba to further strengthen his stranglehold over Parliament. But either way, Sidney has proven to be a charismatic and convincing prophet, wielding the magic ability to recall the past of others and compel them to do his bidding. In Valendia, magic is something that was once commonplace, but over time the idea of it has eroded to rumors and legends. Feeling like Kahlo is way more into Sidney than him, Ashley storms off indignantly to start his mission, leaving her right as Sidney appears. So you see,
That's where the trouble began. I really like the design of Merlot's, and she is central to many of my favorite scenes in the game, but marketing did play up her role in the story. I mean, she's on the cover, and there were full-spread magazine ads featuring the two of them, although the tagline does seem to demote her to a beautiful assistant. As much as I would have liked her to be a playable character, or take a more active role in the plot and not immediately become bait, I do think it's clever how they wind up continuously keeping her relevant. There is more there narratively than her just being a lady to rescue, even though she is still that. Look, I'm saying the game is ahead of its time, but there was a lot of time before writers realized, hey, we keep doing this, huh? Even Ashley, when he first hears about her, is like, she? Oh, that's right. There's no voice actors in the game, but every once in a while I want to cut to a scene so you can see a line from it, and I'll just add in a voice, but I won't tell you whose voice I stole. I'll make it indistinguishable. Like, trust me, you'll never notice.
All because of this religious freedom. Too much freedom. Too many gods, Marge.
Up ahead, Romeo senses a VKP dog approaching and sends his goons after you, making clear that Parliament is their enemy. Sydney also just sort of teleports into the scene, up to something. Proceeding as normal, Ashley walks through a doorway only to appear elsewhere in a green field on a sunny day. A boy appears and calls him Papa. Before he's returned to the dank cellar, he's led into a trap and attacked by a massive minotaur, but is quickly able to dispatch it as for some reason boss fights are markedly more easy than common enemy spawns. I mean, Ashley is very skilled in the martial arts. With the beast felled, Sydney makes his presence known with a golf clap. Clearly knowing more about Ashley than he lets on, he backhandedly compliments him for his cool and detached disposition. He's so calm, it's as if he has no soul. Intrigued, he displays his ability to explore the past secrets of others and forces Ashley back to the field he saw earlier. This time, there's more to it. The boy reappears, as well as his mother, and judging by his hair, Ashley himself is his father. They share a muted but clearly pleasant moment together as a family before two soldiers appear and make a nightmare of this dream. When he comes back to reality, Sydney blames the death of his family on Ashley, who denies it, claiming it was fallen knights that were responsible. But Sydney cruelly explains that his failure to protect his family makes their killing his fault. He's intentionally goading him for some reason, trying to piss him off. He then motions to Hardin, who reveals that they have taken Merlot's as prisoner, and to some mysterious end he wants Ashley to give chase, to bumble through the treacherous path full of traps he's left for him. More in the dark than ever, it's clear that Ashley plays a larger role in the motivations of the other players than we previously thought. What's immediately quite novel when compared to other Square games is the moral ambiguity of its cast. Characters can see each other in a certain light, but they are all mostly given enough time to display nuance and depth. Nobody feels like a stock bad guy, even if they're drawn that way, so to speak. Everyone, even Ashley, is shown to be capable of cruelty in pursuit of what they think is right or just, but is realistically plagued with doubt and paradoxical thinking. People get confused, they forget, or they get used, and in that way there is no perfect archetypical character in Vagrant Story. Soldiering forward to Le Monde, Ashley finds what appears to be a dying soldier who begs to be put out of his misery, but Ashley doesn't even have time to fulfill his request before he slumps over and his soul flies out of his chest. Bye-bye. Good luck on your journey to... What? Folks ain't dying like they ought to. On top of that, rising from the cursed earth are a whole host of unnamed ghosts and ghoulies to get grabbed by. If you take the block puzzles into account, it's almost like Ashley's every step is through a gauntlet of challenges organized by Sydney himself. Hardin has been spying on Ashley's progress, and he's freaked out that they're in over their heads. He asks if all risk breakers are this formidable, but Sydney says Ashley is special, calling him a vessel. It's in this scene where we get a lot of rapid-fire, important but obtuse information. We get a good look at the relationship between these two. Sydney is much more methodical than he makes clear. On the surface, his actions seem like chaos, but being a seer of some fashion means he can plan accordingly to his glimpses into the future. Something that Hardin has a lot of trouble understanding. He believes in Sydney, but is left in the dark on his thinking, which frustrates him a great deal and makes him prone to outbursts. As Sydney summons more demons to test Ashley, Merlot sees the ghostly image of a boy that kinda looks like the Duke's son Joshua. But there's a lot of things going on right now, and that doesn't seem all that important. Ashley, through some newly unlocked psychic link between both he and Merlot's, sees all this playing out as though he were there. The game bounces back and forth between these undeniably gamey segments of gameplay. A boss rush dungeon crawler punctuated with puzzle rooms, timers, and inventory management. And then these thoughtful, eloquently written cutscenes. Because the dev team's fascination with video game and fantasy writing outside of Japan pushed them to distinguish the world of Vagrant Story as distinctly un-Japanese and markedly French, something that resonated with American and European players, aided further by what many feel to be one of, if not the best examples of English localization at the time. In interview with the two translators who worked on it, Alexander O. Smith and Rich Amtower, illuminates a lot about how that came to be. Matsuno's script was unique as it stood compared to other usually verbose Square games. This economy of language and focus on small character moments rather than epic exposition dumps allowed the translators to both accurately reflect the writing that was there and bring some creative license to it, which did include at least one dick joke.
We meet again, Ashley. You have no idea how long I've waited to measure swords with you.
You want to do what?
Citing the writing of George R.R. Martin as inspiration for the archaic and flowery dialogue style they went with, which was really validating to learn because I raised an eyebrow when at one point Sydney used the phrase, milk of the poppy, and I have never heard that phrase outside of A Song of Ice and Fire. Because in that universe, opium is used like in place of aspirin, essentially. I then felt a hot wave of shame for noticing that at all. Worth noting that these same guys translated Final Fantasy XII and are mostly to blame for Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy's universe being conflated at all, as they chose to include more nods to this game, when Matsuno never intended those streams to cross so closely. But originally, it was only meant to be a little bit of fan service. A little bit. That's all you need, because Vagrant Story had a lot of fan service, if you know what I'm talking about. I'll take a spoiler break here in case you wish to experience this game's plot on your own, which, if you have any interest in, I would absolutely recommend. Because as far as PS1 games go, Vagrant Story's narrative may very well be one of, if not the most, interesting on the console. It wields this strangely captivating, twisty-turny plot while still leaving an impressive amount in your hands to make sense of, as well as a fair number of things that are borderline non sequiturs that I don't think we'll ever truly have a concrete answer to. It functions like a 30-plus hour pilot episode for a sprawling fantasy TV series that was given a shit time slot and would have been far too expensive to continue producing. After defeating Sydney's next wave of creatures, Ashley finally emerges from the tunnels and steps out into the city of Le Monde. Closer to its center, a crimson blade named Father Duane is kicking down doors looking for any sign of the Mulan camp, and is shown to be considerably more cruel than their enemies. Ashley watches as Duane's brother Grissom interrogates and beats a dying Mulan camp soldier who remains loyal to Sydney until the end. And don't worry, they only introduce one more character in this scene. As Romeo emerges alongside his partner Samantha, he explains that even though people in Le Monde seem to turn to dust and float away, here, people cannot truly die. Their soul is left to wander in pain as their flesh shambles around autonomously. He orders Grissom to rally the troops and wrap up this siege, and assures Samantha that he won't let her meet the same fate. That once they find Sydney, then they find his secret to immortality. Duane spots Ashley spying on Romeo, and a fight ensues where he is slain. There's a good deal of plotless dungeon crawling before Ashley is suddenly thrust into the perception of Merlot's. He sees what she sees, and she sees what he and she sees. And what she sees is Hardin using a power similar to Sydney's to scry and see events happening elsewhere in Le Monde. He's able to determine that the Crimson Blade forces are dwindling in number and beginning to scatter. Despite this, Mulan camp is losing. Hardin begins to panic, and Frustrated by his assurances falling on deaf ears, Sidney uses his compelling ability to get him to pull himself together, assuring him that they are friends and everything is going to be okay. As Sidney leaves to confront Romeo, Hardin, aware of what just happened, tells Sidney that if they are friends, he should never use that power over him again.
What was that? What the hell was that?
In some other part of the city, Romeo and Samantha ruminate on the history of Leomund and the Mulin camp after finding some ancient text in the worn stone walls. It's a brief and odd exchange that seems like it bears little meaning on the rest of the story, but it does imply that Mulin camp has been rebranded by the church and parliament as a cult, a new enemy that threatens the natural order. Yet they clearly existed long before even the birth of the church's patron saint, in a time when magic was commonplace, before the forces of Saint Diogenes stamped it out and planted their cross in its place. Y'all are out here casting magic missiles when you should be falling asleep in a church because your mother got really spiritual after the divorce. They speak about something called the Grand Grimoire, a supposed book holding the magic secrets of life and reality, a new MacGuffin that Romeo wants. Sidney shows up to razz them a bit, attempting to turn Samantha against her lover, but Romeo proves to have many of the same abilities as Sidney. At some kind of stalemate, Sidney condemns his faith, sounding a lot like me in my Reddit atheist face.
Oh, please. Warping the minds of men and shepherding the masses has always been your church's domain. Edit. Why am I getting downvoted?
Ashley sees, like, all of the events of this game from cover. I'm curious if that was actually the result of Metal Gear Shock. I feel like I remember Solid Snake similarly watching all the cutscenes from behind a wall and then repeating the main point of it to himself inquisitively. He's so stealthy in cutscenes, but the principal gameplay is just chain bonking motherfuckers in the face. One detail that I kind of loved is just a small bit of fantasy wonder in a pretty uniformly grim-dark setting. It's when Ashley emerges from another dungeon into a maze-like forest. He momentarily thinks it's snowing somehow, but it's really snow flies. Just a swarm of white bugs that give the appearance of falling snow. There are very few ideas in Vagrant Story that are just fun and not oppressive or sad. Ashley's marveling at the flies is interrupted when he is once again tossed into the eyes of another character. This time, Samantha. She's outside, presumably the room Merlots and Hardin are holed up in, because it's sealed magically as Sidney instructed. This is one of few scenes with another Crimson Blade character named Nisa. I can only assume that this scene was included to display that even though Samantha is at the side of their superior, she doesn't have the same blind devotion as the other Crimson Blades do. The death of their comrades hurts her, and she is frightened by the power of magic, not eager to wield it herself. Romeo shows up to quell her worries, but in the middle of her speaking, Ashley unknowingly speaks through Samantha, causing Romeo to instinctively hit her in the face to break their connection. The hit wounds both Samantha and Ashley, even though he's miles away. The way she sort of stares off bleeding while Romeo is more concerned with planning his enemy's demise than helping her up and explaining what just happened is also pretty telling. Back at the Snowflies, Jan finally stops skulking around in the shadows and introduces himself as a risk breaker to Ashley, claiming that their superior has assigned him to be his partner, forgetting the rule about risk breakers acting alone and never changing plan mid-mission. Frustrated that his ruse didn't go over well, Jan improvises and tries to gain his trust by flexing his knowledge of the situation. He shares that the VKP and Parliament have long known about Leomund's power and about its undying. He claims that Merlot's inexperience led them to rushing into danger, so he was sent to put him back on the right path. He refers to Leomund as a wellspring, offering power to some who have been affected by it. A wellspring that was created intentionally when an earthquake claimed the lives of everyone in Leomund. A whole city used as a singular sacrifice to appease some dark power. Parliament and the church have stamped out magic elsewhere, but here, the birthplace of the Chaldean priestess Mulin camp, the connection to dark magic can only be walled off. Interestingly, Ashley mostly believes him, but still doesn't trust his motives and promises to kill him if they cross paths again before disappearing into the forest. Shortly after, Grissom shows up looking to avenge his brother's death and is clearly in some kind of agreement with Rosencrantz to get the key from Sydney. It's almost like he's playing both